The morning of March 19, 1957, was unseasonably warm for early spring in Memphis, Tennessee. As 22-year-old Elvis Presley stepped out of his purple Cadillac onto the circular driveway of a colonial revival mansion on Highway 51 South, he paused. The white columns gleamed in the morning sun, casting long shadows across 14 acres of rolling pasture. For $100,500, roughly $1.1 million in today's currency, the boy from Tupelo, who'd grown up in a two-room shotgun shack, had just purchased his dream. A mansion grand enough to rival those of the Memphis elite who still whispered about that vulgar rock and roller corrupting their children. But Graceland was never just a house. In its 23 rooms, 8 bathrooms, and 5 staircases lay the embodiment of the American dream turned fever dream. A sanctuary that would become a prison, a symbol of success that would witness devastating failure, a private home that would transform into the second most visited residence in America, welcoming over 650,000 pilgrims annually. Today, the estate generates more revenue than Elvis earned in his entire lifetime, yet it stands frozen in 1977, preserving not just the aesthetic choices of a working-class boy playing millionaire, but the very moment when the music died. How did a modest country estate built for a middle-class Memphis family become the most famous home in America? And what does Graceland really tell us about fame, fortune, and the price of the American dream? Chapter 1. The Mansion Before the King. Long before it became synonymous with rhinestone jumpsuits and peanut butter and banana sandwiches, the land at 3764 Highway 51 South held a very different kind of Southern story. In 1861, this same plot of rolling hills and oak groves served as a Confederate encampment, where soldiers in gray huddled around campfires, unaware that Ulysses S. Grant's forces were marching toward Memphis. The earth that would one day support Elvis's meditation garden once trembled under cavalry charges and cannon fire. But it was in 1939, as Europe descended into war and America emerged from the Great Depression, that the mansion itself rose from this blood-soaked soil. Dr. Thomas Moore and his wife Ruth commissioned architects Furbringer and Ehrman to create their vision of Southern gentility, a 10,266-square-foot colonial revival home that would announce their arrival into Memphis society. The Moores named it Graceland, after Ruth's aunt, Grace Toeuf, who had inherited the land from her father, Stephen C. Toeuf, a successful Memphis publisher who'd printed Confederate currency during the Civil War. The original Graceland bore little resemblance to its current incarnation. The Moores favored understated elegance, crown molding, hardwood floors of Tennessee oak, and a music room where Ruth played classical pieces on a Steinway grand piano. The construction cost them $30,000, a fortune in 1939, when the average American home sold for $3,800. They employed a staff of 3, a cook named Ophelia, a gardener called James, and a housekeeper whose name has been lost to history, each earning between 8 tours and $12 per week, while the Moores' monthly mortgage payment exceeded their combined monthly wages. The estate originally functioned as a working farm, complete with a barn, chicken coops, and a smokehouse. The Moores raised Hereford cattle on the back pastures and maintained a vegetable garden that supplied their table year-round. This was gracious Southern living in the Roosevelt era, a careful balance of sophistication and self-sufficiency, where the lady of the house might discuss Faulkner at her book club, while her cook, the descendant of enslaved people, prepared lunch in the kitchen. By 1957, the Moores' fortune had shifted. Ruth had developed progressive multiple sclerosis, and the couple found the mansion increasingly difficult to maintain. They'd already sold off parcels of the original 500-acre farm, reducing it to just under 14 acres. When they listed the property for $90,000, Memphis real estate agents marketed it as a gentleman's estate, never imagining that its next owner would be anything but. Elvis first saw Graceland on a Sunday afternoon in March, driven past by his friend George Klein. "That's the house I'm going to buy," Elvis declared, pointing through the car window. Klein laughed. The asking price represented nearly half of Elvis's earnings from his breakthrough year. But Elvis saw something the real estate agents missed. Here was a house grand enough to prove he'd made it, yet isolated enough to offer escape. The winding driveway meant fans couldn't peer through the windows. The stone wall along Highway 51 provided a barrier between his new life and his old poverty. The negotiation took less than a week. Elvis offered the full asking price plus an additional $12,500 for immediate possession. The Moores, perhaps eager to escape before their genteel neighbors discovered the buyer's identity, accepted immediately. On March 19, 1957, the boy who'd failed music class at L.C. Humes High School, whose family had been evicted from multiple homes for non-payment of rent, whose father had served 8 months in Mississippi State Penitentiary for check forgery, took possession of one of Memphis's finest estates. The transition was not without its ironies. Mrs. Moore left behind her carefully tended rose garden and English boxwoods. Within months, Elvis would pave over the roses to create a slot car track. The music room that had echoed with Chopin would soon reverberate with Little Richard and Jerry Lee Lewis. The Moores' refined dinner parties would give way to all-night gospel sings and hamburger cookouts at 4 in the morning. Memphis society, which had barely tolerated the Moores as nouveau riche, now watched in horror as their worst nightmare materialized. White trash had moved into the neighborhood, and he had enough money to stay. Yet Graceland's transformation began even before Elvis arrived with his parents, Vernon and Gladys, and his grandmother, Minnie Mae Presley. The morning after the sale, workers arrived to install a swimming pool, the first of many changes that would transform the estate from a symbol of old Southern gentility into something entirely new, a kingdom built on rhythm and blues, teenage desire, and the wild fusion of black and white culture that polite society called dangerous. The mansion that had once embodied the Old South's desperate grasp at relevance would become the throne room of a new American royalty, one that drew its power not from land or lineage, but from a voice that made teenage girls scream and parents clutch their pearls. Chapter 2. Building the Kingdom. The transformation of Graceland from a Memphis society estate into Elvis's personal kingdom began at 6 a.m. on March 26, 1957, when a convoy of trucks arrived carrying the worldly possessions of the Presley family. Among the Louis XIV furniture and new Zenith television sets came something more precious: a green velour chair and a table lamp from the Presleys' previous home on Audubon Drive, items Gladys had purchased on installment plans when Elvis was still driving a truck for Crown Electric Company. These humble pieces would occupy places of honor beside $10,000 custom sofas, a perfect metaphor for Graceland itself, a mixture of nouveau riche excess and working-class sentiment that would define the estate for the next 20 years. Elvis approached the renovation with the enthusiasm of a child given unlimited access to a toy store. Within the first month, he spent $40,000 on improvements, nearly half the purchase price of the house itself. The swimming pool came first, kidney-shaped and lined with tiles imported from Italy, costing $8,500. Then came the renovation of the basement into a recreation room complete with a soda fountain, pool table, and the first of 3 television sets that would eventually occupy the space, allowing Elvis to watch multiple programs simultaneously, a habit that astounded visitors and spoke to his inability to choose just one of anything. But it was the hiring of decorator George Golden from Goldsmith's department store that truly began Graceland's transformation into what one critic would later call early American garish. Golden, working with an essentially unlimited budget, created interiors that reflected not refined taste, but rather the taste of someone who'd never had the luxury of refinement. The living room became a sea of white. White carpet, white curtains, white sofas, with accents of royal blue and gold. The dining room featured a chandelier from a demolished Memphis theater and chairs upholstered in white leather. Every surface that could be gilded was, every fabric that could shimmer did. The workforce assembling this kingdom tells its own story of Memphis in 1957. The construction crews were entirely white, as mandated by union rules and local custom. But the household, staff Elvis inherited and expanded, was predominantly black. Alberta Holman, the cook who would prepare Elvis's legendary fried peanut butter and banana sandwiches. James Bayless, the groundskeeper who transformed the estate's gardens. And Pauline Nicholson, the maid who would later describe finding Elvis crying in his mother's closet, clutching her clothes. These employees earned between $35 and $50 per week. Generous by Memphis standards, but a fraction of the $1,000 Elvis might spend on a shopping spree. The technical infrastructure required to support Elvis's lifestyle pushed the limits of 1950s residential construction. Memphis Light, Gas and Water, had to upgrade the electrical service to the estate after Elvis's air conditioning usage. He kept the house at 60 degrees year-round, repeatedly overloaded the system. The phone company installed a switchboard to handle the dozens of daily calls. A new security system, revolutionary for its time, included electric gates, an intercom system, and floodlights that could illuminate the entire 14 acres at the flip of a switch. Yet for all its modern conveniences, Graceland retained curious anachronisms that revealed the Presleys' humble origins. Gladys insisted on maintaining a chicken coop behind the mansion, gathering eggs each morning as she had in Tupelo. Vernon built a smokehouse where he cured hams and bacon, skills learned during the Depression, when store-bought meat was an impossible luxury. The vegetable garden expanded under Gladys's direction, producing tomatoes, okra, and corn that she canned in the mansion's vast kitchen, filling the same crystal-windowed cabinets where the Moores had stored their Spode china. The costs mounted with dizzying speed. By December 1957, Elvis had spent $200,000 on improvements, double the original purchase price. The monthly operating expenses reached $5,000, covering salaries for 12 full-time employees, utilities, maintenance, and the constant stream of deliveries. Everything from motorcycles to mink coats to cases of Pepsi Cola, which Elvis consumed at a rate of a dozen bottles daily. His accountant warned that such spending was unsustainable, but Elvis, riding high on the success of Jailhouse Rock and Blue Christmas, dismissed such concerns. "There's more where that came from," he'd say, not yet understanding that fame was a finite resource. The neighbors, meanwhile, watched in horror and fascination. The old Memphis families who'd tolerated the Moores as acceptable middle-class professionals now faced something far worse than new money. They faced new money without apology. Elvis made no attempt to fit in. He rode motorcycles across his front lawn. He invited his Memphis Mafia, a rotating crew of good old boys from similar backgrounds, to live on the property in trailers and outbuildings. He hosted impromptu concerts in the middle of the night, the sound of electric guitars and drum kits echoing across the genteel neighborhood. Yet there was something poignant in Elvis's excess, something that revealed itself in quiet moments. Gladys often seemed overwhelmed by the mansion, spending most of her time in the kitchen with Alberta rather than in the formal rooms. Vernon obsessively checked locks and counted receipts, unable to believe their reversal of fortune was real. And Elvis himself, despite surrounding himself with luxury and companions, often wandered the mansion alone at night, a millionaire king in a castle built for someone else's dream. Chapter 3. Life in the pressure cooker. By the summer of 1958, Graceland had evolved into something unprecedented in American culture. A court where a 23-year-old held absolute power, dispensing favors and fortune according to whim. On any given evening, the mansion hosted a circus of activity that defied conventional understanding of how wealthy Americans lived. In the Jungle Room, Elvis might be conducting business with Colonel Parker while his Memphis Mafia played pool in the basement. Teenage fans pressed against the music gates, hoping for a glimpse. And in the kitchen, Alberta prepared fried chicken for 40 people who may or may not show up for dinner. The daily operations of Graceland required a precision that contrasted sharply with Elvis's spontaneous lifestyle. The day staff arrived at 7:00 a.m., beginning with Nancy Rooks, the upstairs maid, who had the delicate task of maintaining Elvis's bedroom, picking up the scattered books on numerology and karate, collecting the half-eaten sandwiches, and carefully arranging the dozens of prescription bottles that had begun accumulating on his nightstand. The house operated on Elvis time, meaning that breakfast might be served at 4 p.m. and dinner at 2 a.m., requiring kitchen staff to work in shifts that defied normal restaurant schedules. The financial machinery behind this operation was staggering. Weekly grocery bills averaged $500, at a time when a family of 4 could eat well on $20. The meat order alone, primarily bacon, which Elvis consumed by the pound, cost more than most Memphis families spent on food monthly. The household purchased Pepsi by the truckload, paper products by the case, and specialty items flown in from around the country. Certain brands of peanut butter from Detroit, specific sausages from Tennessee, bread from a particular Memphis bakery that Elvis favored. But it was the human dynamics that made Graceland truly extraordinary. The Memphis Mafia, Red West, Sonny West, Lamar Fike, Joe Esposito, and a rotating cast of others lived on the property or nearby, each drawing weekly salaries ranging from $150 to $250 for duties that might include anything from driving Elvis to the movies to engaging in impromptu karate matches at 3:00 a.m. These men formed a buffer between Elvis and the outside world, but also created a pressure cooker of masculine competition and dependency that would ultimately prove destructive. The racial dynamics within Graceland reflected the broader tensions of Memphis in the civil rights era. While Elvis employed black staff in positions of trust and intimacy, Alberta knew his dietary preferences better than anyone, and he often sought her advice on personal matters. They still entered through the back door and were never invited to the all-night parties upstairs. Yet Elvis's relationship with his black employees was complex and often contradictory. He gave Alberta's husband a job at Graceland when he lost his factory position, paid for medical procedures for several employees' family members, and bought cars for long-serving staff members. But he also lived within the constraints of his time and place, never challenging the fundamental segregation that structured Memphis society. The estate's isolation from normal life intensified after Gladys's death on August 14, 1958. Elvis had been stationed at Fort Hood, completing his basic training, when his mother's health deteriorated from hepatitis. Her death at Methodist Hospital, with Elvis crying, "She's all I have," marked a fundamental change in Graceland's atmosphere. The mansion became less a family home and more a fortress against grief. Elvis preserved his mother's room exactly as she'd left it, down to the half-finished sewing on her table. He installed a memorial garden where he would sit for hours, talking to her grave as if she could respond. The infrastructure of fame required constant maintenance. The secretarial staff, led by Pat Boyd, handled between 200 and 300 pieces of fan mail daily, each requiring some response, even if just a mimeographed photo. The gift room, a converted bedroom, overflowed with offerings from fans, hand-knitted scarves, religious paintings, teddy bears, and occasionally more disturbing items like vials of blood or hair. Elvis insisted on keeping everything, creating an archive of adoration that would eventually fill multiple storage buildings on the property. Security became an increasing concern as Elvis's fame grew. The original wooden fence proved inadequate against determined fans who would climb over, steal grass as souvenirs, or attempt to peer through windows. In 1957, Elvis installed the famous musical gates, custom designed with musical notes and guitar players, at a cost of $2,500. Guard posts were established, manned 24 hours a day by off-duty Memphis police officers earning overtime wages. The annual security budget reached $50,000, more than most Americans earned in a decade. Yet for all its defenses, Graceland remained surprisingly porous. Elvis often invited total strangers inside if they caught his attention at the gates. One December evening in 1960, he brought in an entire Girl Scout troop selling cookies, buying every box they had and giving them a tour of the mansion. Local teenagers learned that hanging around the gates long enough might result in an invitation to watch movies in the basement or even join Elvis for a motorcycle ride around the grounds. The economic impact on the surrounding neighborhood was profound and not entirely positive. Property values initially plummeted as established families fled the area, unwilling to live near the circus that Graceland had become. Local businesses, however, thrived. The Krispy Kreme on Bellevue Boulevard stayed open all night, primarily to serve Elvis's crew. Lansky Brothers on Beale Street became internationally famous as Elvis's clothier. The local Cadillac dealership sold more cars to one customer. Elvis bought them for friends like party favors, than to entire neighborhoods. Inside Graceland, the contradictions of sudden wealth played out daily. Elvis might spend $15,000 on a shopping spree at Lansky's, then carefully count the change from a $20 bill. He installed a professional soda fountain in the basement, but often preferred to drink Pepsi warm, a habit from childhood when refrigeration was a luxury. Chapter 4. The King's Golden Cage. The 1960s transformed Graceland from a private residence into something more akin to a medieval court, crossed with a minimum security prison. Following Elvis's return from the Army in March 1960, the estate operated on a scale that rivaled small corporations. The monthly operating budget swelled to $15,000, supporting a staff of 22 full-time employees and countless others who orbited Elvis's increasingly insular world. Yet as the walls grew higher and the entourage larger, the mansion became less a symbol of freedom and more a gilded cage from which its owner rarely escaped. The daily routine at Graceland had evolved into a bizarre reversal of normal life. Elvis typically woke around 4:00 p.m., his first meal of the day prepared by Alberta or her assistant, Mary Jenkins, who had learned to cook his eggs exactly 6 minutes and 15 seconds. Any variation would result in the plate being sent back. The breakfast menu never varied: 6 eggs, a pound of bacon, biscuits with sausage gravy, and fresh squeezed orange juice. This meal alone contained roughly 3,500 calories, but it was merely the beginning of Elvis's daily consumption that could reach 10,000 calories. The bureaucracy required to maintain Elvis's lifestyle had grown exponentially. Vernon Presley, installed as business manager despite having only a third-grade education, oversaw accounts that handled millions annually. His office, a converted bedroom on the ground floor, contained filing cabinets documenting every expenditure, from the $30,000 Rolls-Royce Elvis bought on a whim to the 37-cent pack of gum purchased at the corner store. Vernon's secretary, Pat Boyd, managed 3 phone lines that rang constantly with requests for money, appearances, and favors from everyone from legitimate charities to obvious con artists. But it was in the physical transformation of the mansion that Elvis's increasing isolation became most apparent. In 1965, he commissioned the creation of the Meditation Garden, a $21,000 project that, transformed the backyard into a space that seemed to exist outside time or place. Curved brick walls enclosed a circular pool with 4 fountains, surrounded by stained glass panels depicting Spanish missionaries. The inconsistency of the design, Spanish colonial meeting Tennessee camp, perfectly captured Elvis's aesthetic philosophy. If one style was good, 5 styles were better. The Jungle Room, added in 1965, represented the apex of Graceland's transformation into Elvis's fantasy palace. What had been a screened porch became a Polynesian fever dream, complete with green shag carpet on the floor and ceiling, carved wooden furniture that appeared to have been stolen from a particularly aggressive tiki bar, and an indoor waterfall that had to be turned off during recording sessions when Elvis, unable to leave Graceland for a proper studio, began recording albums in this acoustic nightmare. The room cost $35,000 to complete, more than most Americans earned in 5 years, yet Elvis found it homey. The human cost of maintaining this kingdom was considerable. The household staff worked in a constant state of anxiety, never knowing when Elvis might appear demanding a full meal at 5 a.m., or decide to redecorate an entire room because he didn't like how the light hit the curtains. Nancy Rooks later recalled finding Elvis passed out in his bathroom, pills scattered across the floor, and having to decide whether to call for help, risking her job if Elvis was merely sleeping, or leave him, risking his life if he wasn't. These decisions fell to working-class black women earning $75 a week, while managing crises that would challenge trained medical professionals. The Memphis Mafia, meanwhile, had evolved into a complex hierarchy of companionship and control. Red West served as chief of security, but also as Elvis's sparring partner for increasingly violent karate sessions. Joe Esposito managed logistics, but also served as Elvis's voice when the star didn't want to deliver bad news himself. These men lived in a state of perpetual availability. Their families learned that Christmas dinner might be interrupted by a call to accompany Elvis to a midnight movie screening, or a 3 a.m. trip to the Memphis morgue to look at corpses, a morbid fascination Elvis developed in the mid-60s. The economics of this arrangement created a web of dependency that trapped everyone involved. The Memphis Mafia members earned salaries that seemed generous, $200 to $300 weekly, but came with expectations of absolute loyalty and availability. They couldn't take other jobs, their entire economic survival dependent on staying in Elvis's good graces. When Charlie Hodge's mother died, Elvis paid for the funeral, but also expected Charlie back at work the next day. When Marty Lacker's wife threatened divorce over his constant absence, Elvis's solution was to put her on the payroll too, making the entire family dependent on his whims. For the female employees, particularly the blacked, women who formed the backbone of Graceland's domestic operations, the situation was even more complex. They navigated not just Elvis's moods, but also the casual racism and sexism of the Memphis Mafia, who often treated them as invisible, despite their crucial role in maintaining the fantasy. Christine Roberts, who worked as an upstairs maid, later recalled being propositioned by various members of the entourage and having to carefully deflect advances without offending men who could have her fired with a word to Elvis. The financial records from this period reveal the stunning scale of Elvis's expenditures. In 1965 alone, he spent $147,000 on cars, not for himself, but as gifts for friends, employees, and occasionally complete strangers. He kept $10,000 in cash in his bedroom for impulse purchases. One December night, he bought every Christmas tree from a local lot, over 100 trees, and had them distributed to Graceland employees and their families. The gesture cost $3,000 and took the groundskeeping staff 3 days to execute. Yet amid this excess, strange economies persisted. Elvis haggled over the price of hay for the horses he'd bought, but never rode. He complained about the electric bill while keeping every room in the mansion at Arctic temperatures. He would spend $50,000 on renovating a room, then refuse to replace a broken toilet seat because it still worked. These contradictions revealed something essential about Graceland. It was simultaneously a symbol of unlimited wealth and a monument to the anxiety that such wealth might disappear. Chapter 5. The Human Cost. The untold story of Graceland lies not in its famous rooms or celebrated owner, but in the lives of those who made the fantasy possible, the invisible army of workers whose labor, loyalty, and silence maintained the illusion of effortless luxury. By 1965, Graceland employed 47 people, from the highly visible Memphis Mafia to the deliberately invisible black domestic staff who arrived before dawn and left after midnight, their stories systematically erased from the official narrative of the mansion's glory days. Alberta Holman, who cooked for Elvis from 1964 until his death, worked 16-hour days that began at 5:00 a.m., with preparation for whenever Elvis might wake, which could be noon or midnight. Her base salary of $90 weekly seemed generous by Memphis standards for black domestic workers, but calculated against her 100-hour work weeks, she earned less than $1 per hour. She kept a cot in the kitchen's pantry for the nights when Elvis's demands made going home impossible. Her husband, a janitor at a Memphis school, saw her so rarely that neighbors assumed she'd left him. The maintenance staff faced their own peculiar challenges. Willie Johnson, the head groundskeeper, managed 14 acres with a crew of 3, expected to maintain golf course perfection despite Elvis's habit of riding motorcycles across the lawn at 2 a.m. When Elvis decided he wanted a meditation garden in 1965, Willie and his crew worked 18-hour days for 3 weeks, racing to complete the project before Elvis changed his mind. The overtime pay never materialized. Vernon Presley argued they were salaried employees. Despite their understanding, they were hourly. The security guards, predominantly off-duty Memphis police officers, occupied a strange middle ground. Paid $15 per 8-hour shift. Good money for moonlighting cops. They nonetheless faced unique pressures. Harold Lloyd, who worked the main gate from 1965 to 1969, later described the job as combat pay for fighting teenage girls. He was bitten, scratched, and once nearly strangled by his own tie when a fan grabbed it through the gate bars. Yet firing warning shots, as he'd done during a break-in attempt, resulted in Vernon threatening to terminate him for excessive force against Elvis's fans. Inside the mansion, the hierarchy was Byzantine and brutal. The white Memphis Mafia members earned $200, $350 weekly, but paid for it with total availability. Red West hadn't seen his children awake in 6 months because Elvis's schedule meant he arrived home after midnight and left before dawn. Joe Esposito's wife filed for divorce 3 times, withdrawing each time when Elvis intervened with gifts: a car, a house down payment, private school tuition for their children. The price of these gifts was Joe's continued absence from his family. The female employees navigated additional hazards. Pauline Nicholson, an upstairs maid, endured constant sexual harassment from various Memphis Mafia members, propositions that ranged from subtle suggestions to explicit demands. Reporting such behavior was impossible. Complaints went to Vernon, who viewed the women as expendable and the Memphis Mafia as extensions of Elvis himself. When Pauline finally quit in 1968, Vernon contested her unemployment claim, arguing she'd abandoned her position without cause. The economic exploitation extended beyond wages. Employees were forbidden from speaking to media or writing about their experiences, agreements enforced by Vernon's threats of legal action and blacklisting in Memphis's tight-knit service industry. When Nancy Rooks's son needed surgery for a cleft palate, Elvis paid the $3,000 bill. Then Vernon deducted $50 monthly from her paycheck as repayment for the loan. The debt took 4 years to clear, longer than her son's recovery. The racial dynamics created a particularly cruel irony. While Elvis's music had been built on the appropriation of black culture, the black workers at Graceland remained strictly segregated. They entered through the back door, ate in the kitchen, and were never invited to the screening parties or holiday celebrations. During the famous 1968 Christmas party, where Elvis gave away $38,000 in bonuses to the Memphis Mafia, the black staff received $100 gift certificates to Goldsmith's department store, which still maintained segregated water fountains. Yet many employees developed complex emotional relationships with their famous employer. Christine Roberts, who cleaned Elvis's bedroom suite, described finding him crying over his mother's picture, talking to Gladys as if she were present. She would quietly leave, pretending not to notice, preserving his dignity while surrendering her own. These moments of human vulnerability created bonds that transcended employment, yet never erased the fundamental inequality that structured them. The health impacts of Graceland employment were severe, but undocumented. Mary Jenkins developed chronic back problems from carrying trays up the mansion stairs hundreds of times weekly. 2 security guards suffered heart attacks during their employment, stress-related conditions that Vernon argued were unrelated to their work. The kitchen staff dealt with severe burns from preparing meals at all hours without adequate rest. No workers' compensation claims were ever filed. The fear of losing employment outweighed the physical suffering. The psychological toll was equally devastating. Employees lived in constant anxiety about Elvis's moods, which could swing from generous to vindictive without warning. A cook who overcooked Elvis's bacon might receive a Cadillac for Christmas or find herself fired on the spot. This unpredictability created a workforce perpetually on edge, never knowing if they'd return home employed or devastated. By 1970, the turnover rate among domestic staff had reached critical levels. The average employment duration had dropped from years to months. Word had spread in Memphis's black community that Graceland, despite its relatively high wages, was a soul-killing place, as one former employee described it. The mansion that had once been seen as a good job opportunity had become a last resort for those with few options. Chapter 6. Crisis and Decline. The death of Elvis Presley's marriage to Priscilla on October 9, 1973, in a Santa Monica courthouse, sent shockwaves through Graceland that would fundamentally destabilize the kingdom Elvis had built. The divorce settlement, $725,000 in cash, $4,200 monthly alimony for 10 years, $4,000 monthly child support, plus 5% of Elvis's publishing companies, created a financial crisis that would accelerate Graceland's transformation from private paradise to public spectacle. But the real cost couldn't be measured in dollars. It was the shattering of the last illusion that Elvis's world could sustain itself. Within hours of the divorce being finalized, Elvis was back at Graceland, barricaded in his bedroom suite, beginning a 72-hour period that Dr. George Nicopolis would later describe as near-suicidal. The pharmaceutical consumption, already alarming, exploded. The attack case, a black bag containing Elvis's mobile pharmacy, now required 2 people to carry. It contained Dilaudid, Percodan, Placidil, Dexedrine, Bifetamine, Tuinal, Desbutyl, Escatrol, Amityl, Quaaludes, Carbital, Valium, and Demerol, among others. The monthly pharmaceutical bill reached $12,000, hidden in the accounts as medical supplies. The financial implosion was swift and merciless. By December 1973, Elvis's checking account contained $1,247. The Graceland operating expenses had reached $480,000 annually, while Elvis's income, diminished by canceled tours and Colonel Parker's rapacious management fees, barely covered the basics. Vernon, in desperation, began selling Elvis's gold records back to RCA for cash, a detail that would have humiliated Elvis had he been coherent enough to understand. The house itself began reflecting its owner's deterioration. The famous white living room carpet, once pristine, was now stained with food and drink spills that the overwhelmed staff couldn't keep clean. Elvis, in drug-fueled rages, had shot out 3 television sets, leaving bullet holes in the walls that Vernon refused to repair, fearing the publicity if contractors saw them. The jungle room's waterfall had developed a leak that was slowly rotting the floor beneath, but Elvis wouldn't allow workers in to fix it. The staff situation had become desperate. The turnover was so rapid that Nancy Rooks was training new maids weekly, most lasting only days before fleeing the chaos. Those who remained did so out of economic desperation or misplaced loyalty to a man who no longer recognized them. Elvis had begun carrying weapons constantly, a .45 in his waistband, a .38 in his boot, a Derringer in his pocket, and had accidentally discharged them multiple times, once narrowly missing his girlfriend, Linda Thompson. The Memphis Mafia was disintegrating. Red and Sonny West, fired by Vernon in July 1976, in a cost-cutting measure, were writing a tell-all book that would expose Elvis's drug abuse. Dave Hebler, also dismissed, was cooperating with the project. The betrayal sent Elvis into a paranoid spiral. He hired private detectives to follow his former friends, convinced they were plotting to kill him. The security budget, even with 3 fewer employees, increased to $200,000 annually as Elvis demanded round-the-clock surveillance of perceived enemies. Dr. Nicopolis, Elvis's personal physician, was now at Graceland daily, sometimes multiple times, administering injections that he claimed were vitamin B12, but were actually powerful narcotics. His presence had become so routine that he had his own parking space and bedroom. The medical bills for 1976 alone exceeded $250,000, not including the pharmaceuticals obtained through a network of doctors across Memphis, each believing they were Elvis's sole physician. The isolation was complete. Elvis hadn't left Graceland for anything but concerts in 6 months. The windows in his bedroom suite were covered with aluminum foil to block all light. He lived on a diet of prescription drugs and junk food. His weight had ballooned to 260 pounds. The famous gold lame suit from 1957 couldn't fit around one thigh. Yet the entourage continued the charade, telling him he looked great, that the audiences loved him, that everything was fine. The economic reality was unavoidable. In January 1977, Vernon met with attorneys to discuss declaring bankruptcy. Graceland's mortgage, refinanced 3 times, stood at $494,000. The IRS was investigating $1.6 million in questionable deductions. American Express was threatening to cancel Elvis's card over $89,000 in unpaid charges. The private planes, a Convair 880 named Lisa Marie, and 2 smaller jets, cost $900,000 annually to maintain while sitting unused at Memphis Airport. On August 15, 1977, Elvis played what would be his final show at the Market Square Arena in Indianapolis. He forgot lyrics, slurred words, and at one point appeared to fall asleep, standing up. The audience of 18,000, many leaving early, witnessed not the death of a king, but something worse: his public decomposition. He returned to Graceland in the early hours of August 16th, driven straight to his bedroom suite, where Dr. Nicopolis was waiting with syringes. The final inventory of Elvis's bedroom, conducted after his death on August 16th, revealed the extent of the pharmaceutical holocaust: 359 Percodan, 275 Delaludin, 186 Dexedrine, 174 Bifetamine, 178 Amytal, 164 Valium, 150 Quialudes, 124 Dilaudid, 89 Placidil, and dozens of other medications. The marble bathroom where he died, reading a book about the Shroud of Turin, contained 3 oxygen tanks, a dialysis machine, and medical equipment that would have been appropriate for an intensive care unit. Graceland on August 16, 1977, contained 14 people, staff, girlfriends, and hangers-on. But Elvis Aaron Presley died alone on his bathroom floor, the king of a crumbling kingdom that had become his tomb. The mansion that had promised freedom had delivered only a more elaborate form of imprisonment, one decorated with gold records and prescription bottles. Chapter 7. Resurrection and Reinvention. At 3:30 p.m. on August 16, 1977, as Elvis Presley's body was being prepared for autopsy at Baptist Memorial Hospital, Graceland faced an existential crisis that went beyond grief. The estate owed $500,000 in taxes, carried a $494,000 mortgage, and required $50,000 monthly to maintain. Vernon Presley, standing in his son's bedroom amid scattered pills and shattered furniture, told Priscilla, "We'll have to sell it all. There's no money left." Within 18 months, this assumption would prove catastrophically wrong. Not because money existed, but because Priscilla Bolu Presley would transform Graceland from a financial liability into the second most visited home in America. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Over 75,000 mourners descended on Graceland in the 48 hours following Elvis's death, crushing the gates, destroying landscaping, and overwhelming the skeleton crew of staff who remained. Vernon, suffering from heart problems exacerbated by grief, could barely function. The IRS, with characteristic timing, served notice of audit 3 days after the funeral. The state of Tennessee announced plans to assess inheritance taxes on the estate's value, which they estimated at $10 million despite its debts exceeding assets. When Vernon died on June 26, 1979, the crisis deepened. His will left everything to Lisa Marie, Elvis's 9-year-old daughter, with Priscilla as co-executor alongside the National Bank of Commerce. The bank immediately recommended liquidation, sell Graceland, auction the contents, invest conservatively. Their projection showed the estate would be bankrupt by 1981 without dramatic action. The maintenance alone, insurance, taxes, security, and minimal upkeep, cost $480,000 annually while generating zero revenue. Priscilla's decision to open Graceland to the public faced massive resistance. The city of Memphis considered it inappropriate commercialization. The neighborhood association filed suit to prevent tourism in their residential area. The remaining staff, particularly those who'd served since the 1960s, saw it as betrayal of Elvis's memory. Jack Soden, the investment advisor Priscilla hired to study feasibility, initially recommended against it, warning that turning Graceland into a tourist attraction could cheapen Elvis's legacy beyond repair. But Priscilla possessed something Vernon had lacked: business acumen unclouded by sentiment. She commissioned a study showing that 250,000 people annually visited Elvis's grave at Forest Hill Cemetery before his body was moved to Graceland. If even half that number would pay to tour the mansion, the estate could survive. She invested $560,000, nearly all remaining liquid assets, into converting Graceland into a museum while maintaining the illusion that Elvis had just stepped out. The transformation required delicate balance. The kitchen where Alberta had cooked thousands of meals became a display space, but her personal touches, the prayer card tucked behind the stove, the apron hanging on its hook, remained. The jungle room, scene of Elvis's final recording sessions, was restored to its full Polynesian excess, the bullet holes spackling over, the water damage repaired. Each room was frozen at a specific moment, not August 16, 1977, but an idealized compilation of Graceland's best periods. On June 7, 1982, Graceland opened to public tours. The first day saw 3,024 visitors at $5 per ticket. Within a month, daily attendance averaged 2,500. By year's end, 536,000 people had toured the mansion, generating $3.2 million in revenue. The gift shop alone, selling everything from replica gates to vials of dirt from the grounds, earned $800,000. Graceland had been saved, but at a cost Elvis would have found unbearable. His sanctuary had become a shopping mall. The sanitization process was meticulous. The tour script, refined through dozens of iterations, mentioned Elvis's generosity but not his addiction, his musical genius but not his artistic decline, his love for his mother, but not her alcoholism. The black employees who'd sustained Graceland were reduced to nameless staff in the narrative. The Memphis Mafia became Elvis's friends. The story of Graceland was bleached of its darkness, transformed into an American fairy tale suitable for family consumption. Yet cracks in this narrative appeared immediately. Former employees, no longer bound by Vernon's threats, began speaking. Nancy Rooks published a memoir detailing the drug abuse. Red and Sonny West's book, Elvis, What Happened, became a bestseller. The National Enquirer published photos of Elvis in his coffin, taken by a cousin who'd been paid $18,000. The myth Priscilla was constructing competed with an increasingly sordid counter-narrative. The economics of the new Graceland were staggering. By 1985, annual revenue reached $15 million. The estate employed 450 people, 10 times the number during Elvis's lifetime. The organization purchased all surrounding properties, creating a complex that included restaurants, hotels, and exhibition spaces. Elvis Presley Enterprises, the corporation managing these assets, was valued at $100 million by 1987. Lisa Marie's inheritance, nearly worthless in 1979, had multiplied 50-fold. But this success created new contradictions. The Graceland tourists experienced bore little resemblance to Elvis's reality. The drug paraphernalia was hidden, the bullet holes repaired, the medical equipment removed. The narrative emphasized Elvis's rise while minimizing his fall. Visitors left believing they'd glimpsed Elvis's life when they'd actually toured a carefully curated illusion, a theme park of selective memory. The staff hired to maintain this illusion occupied a peculiar position. Tour guides memorized scripts that answered questions about Elvis's favorite foods, but deflected inquiries about his death. Security guards protected not against intruders, but against visitors attempting to photograph restricted areas or pocket souvenirs. The maintenance crew's primary job was erasing evidence of 650,000 annual visitors, maintaining the fiction that Elvis might return any moment. Chapter 8. Hidden Histories Revealed. The transformation of Graceland into a corporate entity worth hundreds of millions sparked an unexpected consequence: the emergence of suppressed voices and buried histories that the official narrative had systematically erased. Beginning in the late 1980s, a counter-history of Graceland began emerging from academic research, employee testimonies, and investigative journalism that revealed the mansion's darker truths, stories of exploitation, appropriation, and erasure that fundamentally challenged the sanitized version sold to tourists. Dr. Portia Maltzby's groundbreaking 1989 research at Indiana University uncovered the systematic erasure of Black contributions to Graceland's history. Through interviews with 14 former Black employees, she documented how the estate's official history had written out the very people who'd made Elvis's lifestyle possible. Alberta Holman, who'd cooked for Elvis for 13 years, wasn't mentioned in any tour materials. Willie Johnson, who designed the meditation garden's layout, was credited merely as grounds staff. The 43 Black employees who'd worked at Graceland between 1957 and 1977 had been reduced to anonymous servants in the official narrative. The financial records, finally released through a 1992 Freedom of Information Act request related to IRS investigations, revealed stunning exploitation. While Elvis gave away Cadillacs to strangers, his Black employees' children qualified for free lunch programs. Mary Jenkins's son, Robert, disclosed that his mother had worked 100-hour weeks for 13 years without overtime pay, while Elvis spent her annual salary on a single shopping spree. The total wages paid to black employees from 1957-1977 amounted to less than Elvis spent on jewelry in 1974 alone. Archaeological excavations conducted in 1994 during expansion construction uncovered artifacts that told different stories than the official tour. Behind the mansion, workers found the foundations of slave quarters from the original Grace Toph plantation, complete with pottery shards and metal implements. The land Elvis had purchased carried the weight of slavery, a history the estate had never acknowledged. Further excavation revealed a trash pit containing thousands of prescription bottles, medical syringes, and pharmaceutical packaging, material evidence of the addiction the tours never mentioned. Former Memphis Mafia members, facing financial hardship in their later years, began breaking their silence. Lamar Fike's 1995 interview with researcher Alana Nash revealed that Elvis had overdosed at least 7 times between 1973 and 1977, each incident covered up by paying off hospital staff and falsifying medical records. Red West disclosed that he'd been ordered to procure drugs from street dealers when Elvis's multiple doctors began questioning his consumption. These revelations shattered the narrative of a tragic but natural decline, revealing instead a systematic enabling operation that had facilitated Elvis's destruction. The women of Graceland began speaking in the 1990s, their stories revealing a culture of sexual exploitation hidden beneath the mansion's glamorous facade. Joyce Bova, a congressional secretary who'd had an affair with Elvis, revealed she'd been surveilled by private detectives, her phone tapped, her movements tracked. Multiple women described being given drugs to make them compliant, then discarded when Elvis tired of them. The Memphis Mafia had functioned partly as procurers, bringing women to Graceland for Elvis's selection, a practice that would today be recognized as sex trafficking. Linda Thompson's 2016 memoir provided the most detailed account of Elvis's final years, revealing a man so paranoid he kept loaded weapons in every room, so addicted he required constant medical supervision, so disconnected from reality he believed he could heal the sick through touch. Her descriptions of finding Elvis unconscious, reviving him with slaps and cold water, then pretending nothing had happened for the benefit of the entourage, revealed Graceland as a site of collective delusion maintained through fear and financial dependence. The discovery of Vernon Presley's private correspondence in 2018 exposed the estate's financial crimes. Letters showed Vernon had embezzled at least $1 million from his son, using Elvis's accounts to pay personal debts, support mistresses, and invest in failed business ventures. He'd sold Elvis's publishing rights for far below market value, taking kickbacks from buyers. Most damning, he'd conspired with Colonel Parker to hide Elvis's earnings, keeping the singer financially dependent despite generating millions annually. Dr. George Nicopoulos's medical records, released after his death in 2016, documented the pharmaceutical holocaust he'd orchestrated. In Elvis's final year alone, he'd prescribed 10,000 doses of amphetamines, barbiturates, narcotics, tranquilizers, and hormones. The records showed he'd written prescriptions in false names, used multiple pharmacies to avoid detection, and continued prescribing even after Elvis had overdosed. The image of the devoted physician was replaced by that of a drug dealer with a medical license. The racial reckoning of 2020 brought new scrutiny to Graceland's relationship with black culture. Scholars highlighted how Elvis had built his fortune on music directly taken from black artists who'd died in poverty. Big Mama Thornton, who'd originally recorded Hound Dog, died with $50 in her bank account, while Elvis's version generated millions. The estate's gift shop sold Elvis Invented Rock and Roll merchandise, while Arthur Crudup, who'd written That's All Right, had died unable to afford a headstone. Former employees formed the Graceland Workers Association in 2019, documenting their experiences and demanding recognition. Their testimonies revealed that many suffered from PTSD, describing nightmares about Elvis's rages, anxiety from years of walking on eggshells, depression from witnessing his deterioration while being powerless to help. Several revealed they'd never visited Graceland as tourists, unable to reconcile the sanitized tours with their lived experience of the mansion as a site of exploitation and tragedy. These revelations forced Elvis Presley Enterprises to acknowledge some uncomfortable truths. In 2021, they added a plaque acknowledging the enslaved people who'd worked the original plantation. They included Alberta Holman's name in tour materials. They created an exhibition about Elvis's relationship with black music that included some acknowledgement of appropriation. Yet these were token gestures against decades of erasure, small concessions that didn't fundamentally challenge the profitable mythology. Chapter 9. Legacy and Modern. Meaning, today, Graceland stands as America's most visited private home after the White House, yet what it represents has fundamentally shifted from its original meaning. No longer merely Elvis's mansion, it has become a Rorschach test for American culture, simultaneously a shrine to success and a cautionary tale about excess, a symbol of racial appropriation and cultural fusion, a monument to the American dream, and a mausoleum of its dangers. The 650,000 annual visitors who pay $77 for the Platinum Tour aren't just touring a house. They're participating in a ritual that reveals more about contemporary America than about Elvis Presley. The economics of modern Graceland would astonish Elvis, who died virtually bankrupt. Elvis Presley Enterprises generates $32 million annually from tours alone, with total revenues exceeding $100 million when including licensing, merchandise, and media rights. The company employs 450 full-time staff and 200 seasonal workers, making it one of Memphis's largest private employers. The estate that once hemorrhaged $500,000 annually now generates more profit in a month than Elvis earned in his best year. Yet this transformation from financial disaster to corporate success story perfectly embodies the American genius for commodifying tragedy. The visitor experience has evolved into carefully orchestrated emotional manipulation. The audio tour, narrated by actor John Stamos with commentary from Priscilla and Lisa Marie, guides visitors through a narrative arc designed to maximize both sentiment and spending. The path through the mansion, entering through the foyer, excluded from the upstairs, ending at the meditation garden graves, creates a journey from aspiration through achievement to mortality. The gift shop placement, immediately after the emotional crescendo of Elvis's grave, exploits grief-induced impulse purchasing, with visitors spending an average of $47 on merchandise after being moved to tears. The international dimension of Graceland tourism reveals Elvis's transformation into a global symbol transcending his American origins. Japanese visitors, comprising 15% of annual attendance, don't come for the music. Many don't speak English and weren't alive during Elvis's career. They come for what Elvis represents in Japanese culture, the ultimate expression of American excess and individualism, qualities both admired and feared. Brazilian fans conduct religious ceremonies at the grave, treating Elvis as a saint in their syncretic spiritual practices. The mansion has become a pilgrimage site for seekers who project their own meanings onto its rooms. The racial dynamics of contemporary Graceland remain fraught with contradiction. The estate now acknowledges Elvis's debt to black music, featuring an exhibition called Elvis and Black Music that includes testimonials from black artists. Yet the gift shop still sells Confederate flag memorabilia, and the tour guides, still predominantly white, struggle to address questions about cultural appropriation. The mansion exists in a Memphis that is 64% black, Yet Graceland's visitors are 89% white, creating a bubble of whiteness in a predominantly black city, perpetuating the segregation Elvis never challenged. The preservation efforts at Graceland raise philosophical questions about authenticity and memory. Every surface Elvis touched has been replaced multiple times, yet the estate claims to maintain the mansion exactly as Elvis left it. The famous green shag carpet in the Jungle Room is a reproduction. The original was destroyed by foot traffic. The pool table felt has been replaced 17 times. The kitchen appliances are replicas. The originals broke down decades ago. Like the ship of Theseus paradox, one must ask, if every component has been replaced, is it still Elvis's Graceland? Or has it become a simulation of itself, a hyper-real version more authentic than the deteriorating reality Elvis inhabited? The labor conditions at modern Graceland echo historical patterns. Tour guides earn $12 hourly, without benefits for part-time staff. Many work multiple jobs to survive in Memphis, where the cost of living has increased 300% since Graceland opened for tours. The maintenance staff, still predominantly black, earn wages that qualify them for food stamps while maintaining a property worth hundreds of millions. The gift shop workers, selling $30 t-shirts, can't afford the merchandise they sell. The exploitation that characterized Elvis's Graceland continues, now corporatized and rationalized through market logic. The psychological impact on workers of performing Elvis's story daily creates unique challenges. Tour guides report dreams where Elvis speaks to them, anxiety about deviating from scripts, and difficulty separating the manufactured narrative from historical reality. Several have required therapy after years of repeating the same stories, smiling through the same jokes, pretending enthusiasm for the 10,000th time. They become actors in a play about a man playing himself, layers of performance that blur identity and reality. Graceland's influence on American culture extends far beyond its gates. It established the template for celebrity home tours, from Michael Jackson's Neverland to Prince's Paisley Park. It pioneered the transformation of personal tragedy into profitable entertainment, a model replicated across the celebrity industrial complex. The estate's success in monetizing death created an industry worth billions, where dead celebrities often earn more than they did alive. Elvis, who made $4.3 million in his best year, now generates $40 million annually, death being the ultimate career move. The mansion's meaning continues evolving with each generation. For baby boomers, it's a nostalgic portal to their youth. For Generation X, it's camp kitsch. For millennials, it's Instagram backdrop. For Generation Z, it's a monument to unsustainability. The private jets, the excess, consumption, the racial appropriation, all representing what they're fighting against. Each generation projects their values onto Graceland's rooms, making it less a historical site than a mirror reflecting changing American consciousness. Chapter 10. Conclusion: The Eternal Mansion. As the last tour group exits through Graceland's gates each evening at 6 p.m., the mansion doesn't return to silence. Security guards patrol corridors where Elvis's ghost supposedly walks. Motion sensors trigger in empty rooms. The HVAC system maintains perfect climate control for no one. Graceland exists in a permanent state of waiting, for visitors who will come tomorrow, for an owner who will never return, for a reckoning with its true meaning that may never arrive. The numbers tell one story: 650,000 annual visitors, $100 million in revenue, 450 employees, 23 rooms preserved in amber. But the real story of Graceland transcends accounting. It's the story of American aspiration and its discontents, of a poor boy who achieved everything and nothing, of a nation that transforms its traumas into entertainment and its entertainment into religion. Graceland stands as perhaps the perfect American monument, built on appropriation, maintained through exploitation, sustained by nostalgia, and profitable beyond imagination. We've traced the mansion's evolution from a Memphis doctor's country estate through Elvis's kingdom to its current incarnation as corporate mythology. We've heard from the silenced voices, the black workers whose labor was erased, the Memphis mafia whose loyalty was purchased, the women whose stories were suppressed. We've examined the financial records that reveal systematic exploitation and the medical records that document pharmaceutical holocaust. We've seen how Graceland transformed from hemorrhaging money to generating fortunes, from private tragedy to public commodity. But what does Graceland teach us about ourselves? Perhaps that America excels at packaging pain as product, at transforming failure into franchise. Perhaps that we prefer our heroes frozen in death rather than complicated in life. Perhaps that we'll pay $77 to tour a stranger's home while ignoring the homeless outside our own. Graceland is a mirror, and what we see depends on where we stand. In the gift shop or the servants' quarters, at the gates or at the grave. The mansion endures because it serves a need deeper than entertainment. In an era of rental apartments and economic precarity, Graceland represents stability, a house that can never be foreclosed, a success that can never be reversed. In a time of racial reckoning, it offers comfortable amnesia, a space where appropriation becomes appreciation, where exploitation becomes employment. In an age of mortality denial, it promises a form of immortality, if fame is sufficient and tragedy is photogenic enough. As you leave this documentary, consider what Graceland means to you. Is it a cautionary tale about fame's cost or a celebration of American achievement? Is it a crime scene or a shrine? Is it Elvis's prison or his palace? The answer reveals less about Graceland than about ourselves. What we value, what we excuse, what we're willing to pay to see, and what we're willing to ignore. The tours will continue tomorrow. The gift shop will sell its replicas. The mansion will wait, neither living nor dead, for the next visitor to project their dreams onto its walls. Graceland endures, eternal and empty, the perfect American monument to everything and nothing at all.